Really excited for this webinar today. I'm here with three amazing people who I have learned a ton from over the years, who I've looked up to, and who I think have a lot of forward-thinking thoughts around how to build cultures, build companies, an amazing experience here. So really thrilled. And we're talking about something that I think is really important, really essential to how you build a company, which is the connection between culture and performance. How do we build the type of culture at our company that drives great performance, builds the type of companies that we look up to? And so just really thrilled to have time with this group. So we'll spend half an hour, maybe a little bit longer, sort of with questions that we've kind of come up with ourselves, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So if you do have questions throughout, if you've got particular things that you want to ask any of our guests, we would love to have that, and we'll have time at the end, and we'll go through that. So just really quickly to get started, before we go into the questions, I'd love for everybody here to introduce themselves, just maybe share who you are, a little bit about your company, and as a fun fact, what's your most recent Amazon purchase? So Anna, maybe you want to kick us off.
Sure. My name is Anna Binder. I run people operations for Asana. We are about 500 employees, and we've got, let's say, eight offices around the globe. My most recent Amazon purchase, my daughter went to sleepaway camp on Saturday, and so I'm putting together the age-old care package, and I'm trying to avoid landfill. So I bought some brownie mix and some Polaroid film to send her.
Thank you. Perfect. Maya, do you want to?
Hello. Yeah. Hey, I'm Maya. I'm head of people here at Stripe. We are, I think in 2 weeks, we'll have 2,000 Stripes across some 10 odd offices around the world. And my last Amazon purchase was running socks. I love new running socks. And so I buy them way too often.
Great. This is Anand. I'm head of engineering at Hired. So Hired is about 270 people right now across 6 offices across the world. And in terms of my purchase, so my kids have been really hot on building their own PC. So I have 2 teenagers. So they've been instructing me what all stuff they want to buy in terms of electronics and whatnot. And I've been just purchasing things left and right from them. So the good news is they actually are done building the PC as of last night.
Awesome. Cool. Always good to hear about what people bought last on Amazon, and I know it is all of our secret pleasure to be buying from that company and filling our houses with cardboard. So thank you everyone again for being here. Really looking forward to dig in. And what I wanted to start with is a question about culture that I think a lot of us think about, and I don't know that it gets discussed a lot, which is, should culture be descriptive of the truth? Is a culture trying to describe what's there as accurately as possible? Or is it prescriptive? Is it something where we are trying to say what it ought to be, what we aspire for it to be, and then building towards that? So Maya, I'd love to start with you and hear your thoughts on sort of this sort of chicken or the egg about culture.
Yeah. Well, first, I think it really depends on the company. And so maybe let's not be prescriptive about how to do it. But what I've seen with companies, I've seen 3 different approaches here, 3 flavors. There's implicit culture. There's companies that just naturally are what they are, and they have this culture, but they haven't quite articulated. I've seen companies that have an explicit culture, and they've done an exercise where they've gone around and said, what are the things that make us who we are? What are our values? And articulated those. And I would call that explicit. And then I think there's a third flavor that's more intentional. That's some combination of explicit, but a little bit of aspirational as well, which obviously has to still ring true to who you are, but has to have this aspect of, and this is who we want to be, and this is who we aspire to be. And so I think when I look at who we are at Stripe, I'd say we're on that intentional culture, which is, you read what we say about our operating principles, and they are true, and they're a little bit ambitious, as we are here at Stripe, we like to say. And so I think it's a little bit of who we aspire to be as well.
I think that really resonates with me. I just wanted to say that, there can always be some element that is aspirational, or, hey, we want to, as we're growing, we want to shift a little bit more in this direction or accentuate. But you have to have a foundation of a culture that is actually authentic to who you are in order to have the credibility to make that change. So I think that ability to change is really important in all of our companies that are growing as quickly as they are.
When you do have an aspirational elements of your culture, what goes into deciding what those aspirational elements are? So, the way I'm hearing you both describe it is there's parts of the culture that are descriptive, that are sort of just kind of describing the truth as it is. And then there's parts that are deciding where we want to be and how we want to evolve. How do each of you think about how you choose what direction you want your culture to evolve? Is that a business decision? Is that intuition? Is that based off of what your people are telling you? Like, how do you decide where to go?
So I can just take one step at this. So as a company goes on to its journey from a startup of few people to a growing company to a really large company, so the culture and how prescriptive you want to be somewhat needs to be married to the scale that you're looking at, and how do you make sure as the company scales that your culture scales with it. So you can define what you got today or what you aspire to be in a year from now, but as you're scaling and depend upon your growth, you need to kind of get this constant feedback loop to kind of make sure you are iterating on what you know about, and then you can build for future, depending upon how many people, how many customers you're having with your company.
So go ahead.
No, please.
Well, I was going to share, we use something called the voice of the employee, which is a little bit of a formula of inputs that we receive as we're thinking about how to evolve the culture. And the voice of the employee has some quantitative inputs like our engagement survey, our exit interviews, and some surveying information. It also has some very top-down things like what are the business objectives, what are the big product bets that we're making, what is the leadership team valuing, and then it has a whole host of bottoms-up inputs. So quarterly sessions we do with our ERG leads, the input that our people partners get from the employees, our global site leads and what's top of mind for them. And then we have, obviously we apply some judgment as we prioritize, but we do try to take all those inputs and frankly put them into a spreadsheet so that we can see the hotspots of what's priority and how we want to emphasize, what we want to emphasize and what we want to focus on. Because I think that this work is never ending, and it's one of the hard things is figuring out how to prioritize. So I use the voice of the employee to help inform that.
Yeah, and I think, Jack, you and I have talked about this a bit, but and Anna as well, like this concept of the cultural operating system we think a lot about here, which is, I think you just need to accept that the culture is not static and it will change. And so you can take two approaches. You can let it happen organically, or you can say, I'm going to be intentional about this. I'm going to build the operating system that collects all these inputs and continuously nudges the culture in the way that we're trying to do. And I think it makes a lot of sense to just embrace that will evolve and change, because the world around you is changing anyway. And so you actually want this to be happening and be part of that evolution.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think this is part of why it's so important for people teams to have feet on the ground and to have like their ear towards the culture so that they know how to evolve it. Because I think where we can go wrong is if we lose the connection of what the truth reality is and the aspiration. So everything that you all talked about really resonated. The next question I wanted to ask is about the connection between values and culture, and do you need, which one sort of drives the other? So, I can sort of share our own example at Lattice, where we established our company values about a year ago when we were 50 or so employees. And that was after, quite some time working together as a team. And then the values came. I know there are other companies where you start with the values and everything builds around from that. So I'd love to hear about each of your own experiences of which sort of leads the other, the values or the culture, and how they connect?
So let me start off with something. So in my opinion, culture is a combination of values and the behaviors that go to exhibit those values, right? So which comes first, the culture or the values? I don't think that's important, that's the most important thing. The thing is the behaviors that you want to establish. So those are the things that would start from the day one your company starts, because people will behave naturally according to whatever they need to do to get the job done to make the company successful. If you define the values to begin with, you can match up the right behaviors to set up the right culture. If not, then what Maya was saying before is that whether it's intentional or not intentional, and the behaviors will start showing up. And then you get on to this exercise of, what do we know about our culture today and where do we want to be going forward?
Yeah. And the other thing I would add to that is that with all this evolution, right, the world is evolving around us. The people we bring into our organization is evolving. Our businesses will likely change and evolve over time and grow. I think it's okay to embrace that and not be so fixated on this was exactly how we defined the culture 7 years ago. And it can never change, because that gets you in this very stuck position and it doesn't allow you to keep evolving with everything changing around you. And so there's a question of which do you do first, but I think in some ways the bigger question is how often are you revisiting it? And look, if you're changing your values every 6 months, I might say that's too much. But if you say that you will never touch the values and the company will never change, that also feels like, probably not the right approach. And so I like the idea of continuously looking at it and saying, do all these things still hold true? Do they still make us the better company that we want to be? Or are there things that we could tweak and nudge along the way? And we've, I don't have the exact number because I haven't been here all that long, but we've definitely made some evolution to our operating principles every couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
I think just riffing off what you said, right? Like our culture and our values are here. They serve the purpose to enable us to achieve our mission or to win in the marketplace, insert whatever master goal you have. But the culture and values that work at Asana might not work to achieve Hired's goals or to achieve Lattice's goals or Stripe's goals. And I always think this is funny because people, the famous Netflix slide deck or, whatever artifact is out there. And I've talked to so many CEOs who are like, can you just bring that here? And, I think that fundamentally misses the point. You have to build a culture that in foundation of the values that allows you to achieve what you are trying to do. And then I also think it's sort of personal. Every company has a culture. Not every company has a strong set of values. At Asana, one of the sort of quote unquote founder pieces of lore is that Justin and Dustin wrote down the first draft of the values in the very first week that they started the company. They wrote the first few lines of code and wrote the first draft of the values. But also to Maya's point, over the course of 8 years, we've revved on those values 2 or 3 times. And in fact, I just led a process over the last 8 months to do it again. And I think that's part of, we're not static, and what we need to be and how we need to show up to achieve our mission evolves. And so the values evolve.
So I love your point about how the values are in service of the mission and how everything is in service of this mission. And I deeply agree that each company is unique too. And so I think it's not that we should copy other companies, but we can learn from other companies. Okay. If Asana had that mission and those values worked for them, that might inspire me a bit. So I guess to that end, I would love to hear a little bit about Asana's particular culture. And I think, at least from the outside where I sit, there are some really interesting sort of peculiarities and individual aspects of Asana's culture. Things like it seems very mindful. You have this very interesting, I think it's a trimester-based sort of offsite that you do as a company. You don't have titles. I believe you have areas of responsibility. Can you talk about a few of these unique pillars of Asana's culture, just to sort of give visibility and maybe inspiration to others thinking about their own?
Sure. And it's funny, some of these are part of the Asana story, and we are actively looking at dismantling some of them because they don't work. What worked at 100 people won't work at 500 people. So I'll speak to both some of the history and the foundation, but also just try to be honest about what is and what is not working. I think a value we have and a core cultural characteristic is mindfulness. And I think that for some people it's very clear what that is. They live that, they know that. But for a lot of people, it can be shorthanded in a bunch of different ways. And some people are like, oh, that means that you meditate all the time. It doesn't mean that at all. But it does mean intentionality. So we are very clear around what are the things that are the most important. And let's make sure we're clear on what the things that we need to get an A on, and which has trade-offs, which says these are the 10 things we are either going to get a B or a C on, or we're just going to blatantly ignore. And that doesn't mean that those things aren't important. They're just not as important. And versus I think a lot of startup cultures are a little bit more maniacal around, let's just do more faster, do more faster, do more faster. We are very intentional about that. The other thing that is a practice in terms of mindfulness is ensuring that we are, in particular in difficult situations, doing sort of a body and mind and heart check on where we're at, right? Like, are we, I think a lot of interpersonal conflict comes from improper assumptions or assuming scarcity. And so we try to be very intentional around how we show up with each other in those difficult conversations. And so as an example, during our executive team meeting on a weekly basis, we spend about 10 minutes just going around the room, checking in with how are you feeling, which is very different than, hey, how are you doing? It is also very different than, hey, here's 2 minutes on the most important things I'm working on this week. And so another expression of intentionality or mindfulness is several times a year we stop the trains and we do something called Roadmap Week, and which is the worst label ever because it neither comes with a roadmap nor does it take a week. It takes longer. But during Roadmap Week, we reflect on the work from the previous period. We get input on the projects that we're working on with key groups of stakeholders, and we make decisions on what to prioritize for the next period. And then we publish that for the company. So every major project, there are hundreds of them in the company, has a Roadmap Week meeting to do that work.
And this all makes sense because your product.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say this connects to your mission because your product is about how do you work in more intentional ways. And I understand your mission is about connecting, I think, the whole world in some sense.
True. Help humanity thrive by enabling teams to work together effortlessly. So, which is really, we believe that the product is core to that. We also believe that we need to build a product is only going to get you so far. And so we believe in building a culture that exemplifies that. But another, as you said, cultural peculiarity that Stripe and Asana share is some of our philosophy around titles. And I think Maya and I can probably riff that this has been a bumpy road and it's not always easy, right? And I will also clarify, we do have titles, we just don't have level connoting titles, right? So we don't have an associate engineer and a senior engineer and a super senior engineer. Everyone's just an engineer, but that in and of itself is a title.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's all of that made sense. And the resonant thing for me is finding that harmony between your mission and what you're trying to do in the world and the culture that you're creating to build that, because obviously your people are what sort of push that mission forward. Maya, I'd love to do the same. I think Stripe also is a culture that a lot of companies in the Valley really look up to, and I think beyond just being a great business, it's known to be a great place to work and have built a lot of really smart, unique cultural practices. You already mentioned the operating principles, and I think that was, that's something that we've certainly shared a lot internally at Lattice, but there are others too. So I'd love to hear, about this for Stripe as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that even with your question made me think about is we have a really deep learning culture. And just like you said, it's, you can't copy and paste someone else's culture, but it's good to hear what other companies are doing. We love hearing what other companies are doing. Every time we go down an initiative that we haven't done before, one of the first things we say is like, did you talk to our users? What did they say? And what other companies have you talked to and what did they say? And so even right now, we're at an inflection point in our global geo strategy. This is the first year we're hiring more people outside of San Francisco than inside San Francisco. And one of the initiatives that I've been working on with several of our team members is talking to a bunch of companies who've done this before. It doesn't matter if they've done 50% or more or less outside of one headquarters, but just in general, how do other companies handle the geo distribution? How do they help mitigate the time zone problems? How do they create inclusive cultures for meetings when people are remote? And so one thing we do is really a deep learning culture with this kind of asking what other folks are doing. The other thing we do a lot of is there's a lot of writing here. And it's interesting. I like to talk about this one because when I first came in, it was a little bit jolting for me because I came from a world of PowerPoints or slides, as we call them now, right? And it took me a little bit to get used to the writing thing. And I said, oh, tell me more. Like, what is this about? I've come to really, really appreciate it and embrace it. And where it comes from is this is back to that intentionality. It's not just that we like to write for the sake of writing because Patrick and John are voracious readers, even though if you've read anything or heard anything about them, they are, and it's amazing and inspiring. But it's not just because of that. It's because one of our operating principles is really about thinking rigorously. And once you get into this writing culture, you realize that very few things make you think as rigorously as writing down your points. It's one thing to put a chart on a slide and go into a meeting and riff a little bit about it and talk about it. It's another thing to say, okay, here's the slide in my memo, and I'm going to put 3 sentences that describe exactly what's here. It's remarkably a lot harder to write 3 sentences than it is to go into a room and just explain it. And so, we're in QBR, quarterly business review time right now, and teams create these memos. And so we start these meetings with a 10-minute pre-read where the team has put together all of this. You sit down, you read the memo, and all of a sudden you can have a super rich discussion about what's been going on with this team all quarter, even if you haven't been a part of it. And I think the analogous way to do this that I've experienced at other companies is you create the presentation and you go into a 45-minute presentation where the team tells you everything that happened and you have a couple minutes of questions. And so again, yes, we have a writing culture, but it's not a quirky thing. It's very intentional because we really care about thinking rigorously at first principles, and we really care about giving people the information they need to then go have the rich discussion. And so those are 2 things I think about a lot.
And it's so true that taking the time to distill your thoughts down into a few sentences is so much more valuable to everybody else, but it takes much more work. And, if that quote, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter or whatever. It's very much that. It is so hard, but you're doing a favor to everybody else rather than if I just go into a room and spitball with 5 people for 30 minutes. I've been less clear, it's not documented, and I took everybody's time. So doing that work, I could not agree more.
And you're doing yourself a favor. Like it is for everyone else. And I think I have felt like I've grown a ton in the last year that I've been at Stripe because it's forced me to improve my clarity of thought. And so, I just wanted to say that it's something I really didn't think I would like coming in and have now come to be one of the biggest champions of it.
That's awesome. So Maya and Anna, we just talked about at sort of the company level, the culture. Really quickly, Anand, I would also love to hear about building the culture within a department within the context of that, because obviously inside of the context that we just talked about, there are, we don't want to say micro cultures, but there are differences in the cultures between teams. And so as an engineering leader, for example, how do you think about building your own team culture in the context of a broader company culture?
Absolutely. So, as I was like mentioning before, so culture is sort of a set of values and behaviors. Now, as a company overall, you can agree on certain values. Like one of the things I've seen over a number of years at different companies, that's a constant value for many companies out there is customer success. Uh, Now, customer success is a great value for a company to have. Of course, everybody have customers; they should love their customers, they should make the customer successful. But what it means for different departments within a company can be different, right? So if I'm looking at an engineering team or a people ops team or IT team, their customers are different. So if I'm heading up an IT team, my customers are internal employees. Uh, so now I'm not necessarily talking about the outward customers, but I'm also talking about my internal customers and figuring out how do I make my internal customers successful. So what behaviors do I need to drive within my growth to make sure that the internal employees of the company are successful? And I guess the same thing will be And I guess the same thing will be true about like a people ops group, where your customers are internal to the company. So now all of your employees are your customers. So the value that you can translate from customer success to employee success at this point. So it's a change of value a little bit, but overall the motive is the same. I'm sorry. Um, but the overall, the motive is the same, which is to make sure that you're carrying that same value that you agree at the company level and carry it down to your department, to your people. One other example I would call out here is, and this is from my past, when I was working at Salesforce a long time ago. So they had this notion of what they call V2MOM, standard for vision, values, methods, obstacle, and measurements. And the way it used to work there is it was sort of a W phenomena where it will start from the top, then it will go all the way down to the bottom, then it will surface up back to the top, and then to the bottom, and then to the top. So essentially, the idea was really that it's an alignment that we are driving between the overall company and different departments. So each department can have their own vision and values that aligns with the company's success, and then we'll take the best things out of those, and those will define the company culture or company values as we move forward.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, V2 Mom is something that early on we looked up to a lot when we were first learning about goals. So it's awesome to hear that's helped as many companies as it has. Building culture obviously is the function of people, and one of the most important inputs to the way that you get people at your company is the sort of nature of the recruiting process. I think one of the most poignant things I heard early on was that the main way that you edit your culture is by who you hire, and of course, who you sort of fire as well. But who you hire is one of the most important determinants of what your culture will be. So I want to try to ask a tactical question that will allow our listeners to sort of take something away. And the question I want to ask is, what are the questions or areas that you like to explore with job candidates to understand if they will be a good addition to your culture? So Maya, I know we had talked about this before, so maybe if you wanted to start with some of your favorites.
Yeah, I think like many companies, we have a dedicated interview that really focuses on this. And we could talk about what it's called. It started as culture fit, it went to culture add. We've actually gone away from that and now just given it its own standalone name. And part of the reason is that everyone has a different perspective, or maybe not exactly different, but people have slightly different perspectives about what it means to be a culture add. And so we wanted to be quite specific about this. And what we're testing for here in particular is it someone who embodies our operating principles, the principles that we think make the most high performing Stripes and makes Stripe the most high performing company it can be. And so by moving away from calling it the culture add interview, I think we've really narrowed in on this is about the operating principles. And then let's get really tactical for a sec, because I feel like that's some of the most helpful things here. It's very consistent. We ask the same questions to all candidates. So a senior candidate, an entry-level candidate will have the same types of questions. and so consistent about that. We actually have a rubric around it. And so when an interviewer is doing it, you know if this is a 1-point answer, a 2-point answer, a 3-point answer, or a 4-point answer. And that really helps to get us all on the same page about what we mean when we're looking for someone who, I was talking before about rigorous thinking, about what it means to bring someone in who is a rigorous thinker. So that's kind of one. The other kind of tactical stuff I like to talk about that's outside of this interview, but something I like to do. So, for example, for my team, I know that I work really well with people who are very collaborative. And I find that the teams that perform the best are the ones who are very collaborative. And so I like to ask a lot of behavioral questions for people. Like, tell me about a time when you went above and beyond to help someone on a different team where it wasn't really part of your scope. And I think the people who are very collaborative will have a great story. My favorite interview question, so if you ever interview with me, now you'll know, is, that's a great example. Give me another one. And the reason I like to ask the follow-up one is I feel like people generally go into interviews with a very good prepared interview stories. And so when you ask someone for a second one on the same topic, they have to draw into their kind of like, okay, do I have one off the top of my head? So people who are very, in my case, collaborative that I'm looking for will generally have a lot of stories that they can just draw on. So that's my kind of that's my favorite culture question.
It's a good one. Anna or
I can keep riffing, but I want to hear what Anna and Anna have to say.
We don't have a specific culture interviewer. I know a lot of companies do it. We've specifically decided not to do it and have made the statement that everyone has a responsibility there. But one thing that we have done is to say, hey, here's how we define a cultural fit. And this is like what a cultural screen is. And they're very specific areas that can be determined by explicit and predetermined questions. So, for example, one of the things that we really value or that we require is somebody who's mission driven. That doesn't mean that they're driven by our mission or that they can articulate why our mission is an important one. I feel like it's our job to do that as part of onboarding. But are they motivated by something outside of themselves? And there's a bunch of different questions, and we allow interviewers to choose, and we make sure that multiple people ask it to be able to come up with a determination there. The second thing is going to the mindfulness. Are you able to reflect and learn from past mistakes? Do you have an ability to put aside your ego and demonstrate some humility around some of the things that you screwed up? And if you can't, you either haven't screwed up, which means you're not human, or you don't have the reflective ability to talk about it, which doesn't work for us. A third thing is just very practically, at every single level in the company, execution matters. GSD. Do you have examples of taking strategy and moving it into implementation and execution? And so when we talk about cultural fit, these are the things that we're screening for at a baseline. And then, of course, we layer on the technical capabilities and the functional responsibilities and screening for those.
So that was, sorry, I just one thing that I just wanted, I know this wasn't even your main point, but one thing I just found very interesting in what you said was that you look for people who are mission driven as a general trait, not necessarily your own. And I think that's not a way I had ever thought about it. I'd always thought of it as sort of, they either connect with our particular mission or not, rather than mission driven as sort of an inherent personal trait. But I see what you're saying, and that's actually very interesting. And in some ways, it's very hard to expect an employee to connect directly with your own mission, but you can look for potentially sources of other times in their life when they were very driven by a mission.
That's right. And, we talk a lot at Asana about culture bugs. And one of the culture bugs is that mission-driven characteristic sometimes gets misinterpreted. And I see interviews saying, hey, they don't really seem bought into the Asana mission, and I don't know, and they're not excited about the product. I'm like, no way. Like, it's our job to get them there once the time is right. But they need to have the fundamental ingredients so that we can bring them there.
Awesome.
So as an engineering leader, I've been interviewing people for a very long time, and one of the things I generally look for is a lot of people do it now. before coming for an interview or someone, have they actually taken time to look into what company values are? What's the outward projected company values? Most companies these days document their values and culture on their website. Have candidates taken time to even go through those and kind of see, is that addition to what they care for or not? And on top of that, specifically at Hired, so I just started at Hired about a month ago, and I'm like totally blown away by the culture over here. By the way, so one of the things that blew me away initially was so a lot of people within the company, so even though I was sort of interviewing for a leadership position here, somebody from marketing showed up and they wanted to do a culture interview. And I said, okay, I'm not really used to a specific culture interview, but I did take time to go and look at what the hired culture is beforehand. So to Maya's point, I had my one answer ready before that interview started. So I think that worked out well. The interviewer in our case did not ask me for a second example, so I think that worked out well as well. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you know what your culture is, what you define your values, and you probe candidates around those values, you get specific examples or insights into are they going to cause a conflict based on what they care about, or are they going to add and enhance what we care about? And that's super important input or insight. It doesn't need to be a decision maker by itself, depending upon how senior a person is coming on board. But if you're bringing on leaders into the company and they don't truly, agree to the values and culture that you put in place, that may be a big red flag. So, so these are the red flags that you look for, and then you can go back and discuss with your team how important these are. Will they cause any problems going forward or not? But more importantly, what additions will this person seem to be capable to bring to the table? And I think that insight is really, really useful.
Awesome.
Jack, something that struck me hearing all this is we talked a lot about the things we look for. And I think one thing we didn't talk about is the things we stay away from, the cultural attributes we stay away from. And in a lot of times, I think that in culture, it really comes down to the hard decisions, right? And I think the kind of easy one to talk about is this kind of no assholes rule. Something we say in our very public culture document is that a lot of companies have a no assholes rule, and we don't. We think that bar is just way too low. Right? Now, that's all well and good to say. I think what it really comes down to is, do you make the hard decisions, both in the hiring and just like in everyday operations? And something that has really made me so proud to be a part of this team here is that we do. But I think that's the moment in time, and I think as companies are growing and thinking about this, like it's those moments when you say, this is not someone who's going to create for us, it's like a warm, humble culture. And making those really hard decisions, I think that's one of the things that if there's anything to take away from like how you hire for culture, it's how you also hire for the people who will detract from your culture.
And those decisions can become very difficult when you really need to fill a role and you meet somebody who you think is capable of doing the job, and you're already late and they're okay culture fit. And those are the tough calls that I think we all get into. Is there room for error? Is there judgment involved here, or is it just if the culture's not right, they're not?
And relatedly, I would love to hear from people. Is the hiring manager the decision, or is it a committee decision?
That's a great question. Oh, so can I add to the questions and then we can figure out who answers
Well,
them?
Let's just talk in questions.
So in my opinion, hiring manager ultimately owns the decision. Whoever the hiring manager is ultimately owns the decision, and all the people who have been on the interview panel, they are the people who are providing all the input based on their conversations. Now it's up to the hiring manager for sure to figure out we should make an offer or not. But usually, what I've done in the past is I would pair up with my people ops person to kind of make sure that I'm not overlooking things that. And to Jack's point, I'm really eager to get this engineer started. I can't wait, to lose the time. So in my rush, I may overlook things that people are telling me should not be overlooked. So even though the decision should lie on one person, you need to make sure that everybody's input is valued.
So we do the same practice at Lattice where hiring managers make the decision. I have heard of there are alternatives that I'm aware of where, for example, I think at Google, the hiring manager does not make the decision. And I think I don't exactly know the intricacies of why, but my assumption is that part of it is to make sure that you don't have this exact sort of bias where a manager needs to get a particular thing done or has incentives that are a little bit different. I'm curious, does the hiring manager make the decision at Stripe and Asana?
We have both approaches depending on the team. And I think
that's a answer.
What's that?
That's a more specific answer, and we have the same. In most teams, it's the hiring manager, and in some teams, there's like a group facilitator that makes it.
I think for me, the one of the most important questions in how the decisions get made is, does everyone feel comfortable having a voice, and can anyone block a decision? And a little bit of policy and process, like are they allowed to block it? But it's more just back to this culture concept. Does anyone in the loop from, the most senior person, generally, yes, obviously, but the junior folks in the loop, do the recruiting coordinators feel like they have a voice and they can say, hey, I have concerns about this candidate? And that to me feels like one of the most important things that you should be doing in creating your hiring process. And I was recently watching an interview process where the recruiting coordinator did voice some concerning interactions they had with the candidate, and everyone listened, and I thought it was excellent, and I was really glad that conversation happened.
I want to get to a couple of the Q&A, just while we have a few minutes left. And one that came up multiple times is around how do you think through leveling and comp and whatnot when you don't have titles. I think a lot of companies aspire to be light on titles, but still want a lot of those sort of back-end practices that give you, fair compensation and, career progression. So, and I know I'm personally curious to learn about this too. So I would love to hear what has been successful, what you would change for companies out there who are thinking about, can we scale a culture without titles?
Anna, you and I were talking about this on Friday.
So I would go. Well, I'll just shorthand by saying, just because we don't have those level connoting titles doesn't mean we don't have a leveling system in the background. And I think however you choose to do that, you have to have some version of that in order to have confidence in your compensation decisions.
Same. I mean, fairness matters a lot. And so if you want to have a fair compensation practice, you need to understand relative experience, relative impact of people in order to pay them relatively, which would then mean fairly.
Okay. So yeah, I don't have any answer, but maybe this question is for Anna from my side. So people usually have aspirations around promotions, or it's not just the compensation element of it. That's one part of it for sure, but it's more about, call it bragging rights, whatever you want to call it. So how do you handle that at Asana without going into specific titles?
Sure. So I'll say a few things. First of all, we generally we use something called the AOR system, the area of responsibility. Everything in Asana that is worth doing or that is important is designated as an AOR. And different people have different AORs. And one way to grow your impact and grow your influence and grow yourself is to take on increasingly larger or either more AORs, or because the business is growing, your AOR is growing. So that's one way that that people sort of understand how their impact is growing and how they're growing personally. The second thing I'll say is, and just real talk, right? That we find that early in career people really don't care about level connoting titles. They're just like, get me in there, put me on the field, let me do great work. Am I learning? Am I having input? And then we find the people at the top that they actually don't care at all, because they're very clear on what their operating envelope is, what their responsibilities are, how they are able to connect their work to the growth of the organization and the business, and they don't care. But that leaves a huge group in the middle, right? And so there are two elements of the problem. One, the first element of the problem is, how do I know that I'm growing? Like, how do I know that my impact, and how does that connect to comp, and like, what does career growth look like? And the second piece of it is, how do I talk to my mom and my friends and the world about it? The first problem, I think, is a solvable problem with very high quality success guides and impact guides and a manager capability to have the conversation about how to grow your impact. And that's something that's probably our top priority in 2019. The second piece, I don't have an awesome answer for. We've done some coaching and some developing and some training about how people can articulate their AORs, for example, on their LinkedIn, but it's not a perfect answer. And I'm actually, to my point earlier, in terms of intentional work, I'm specifically not trying to solve that problem today. I'm trying to solve the individual problem first.
I also love that point that you just made at the end of, like, I'm picking my problems and I prioritize, just like a product team or a marketing team. Like, people teams prioritizing is so key. And so I love sort of just like, even internally, I'm sure you're setting that example. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
on the prioritization bit, we just finished our H2 planning, and one of the things we did this time around that I'm really excited about is we have our top 15 priorities for the half, and then we have a list of what we won't do. And you look at it, and it is painful, because they are all important, good things that have absolutely good, positive ROI, but to this point about being intentional and really trying to focus on the most high impact things, we're making that list. But I think for us, just like back to this thing about the people you don't hire, it's the things you commit not to do. Like, sometimes the crux of how things go is about not just saying what you're going to do, but what you're not going to do.
Okay, one last question that I want to end with is, and it doesn't mean that everybody needs to have an answer, but this has come up multiple times from the audience and others, is how do you know if everything you're doing is working? Like, culture is a little squishy. It's kind of hard to describe. It's a bit of an intangible. We're giving all these inputs, and obviously there's not going to be a perfect answer, or this question would not be an interesting one, but how do you measure whether or not all of these things you're doing around culture and team are working?
I'll take that to begin with, because I might have the shortest answer to this one. I think the other two, Anna and Maya, have been probably dealing with this for a long time, so they can provide a lot more history or context. So I know employee surveys and NPS scores and some of these things are very concrete ways to find out how things are working in the company. But to me, it's personally walking around in the company floors and seeing the excitement and passion in people, and everybody, mission driven, driving towards the company's success. To me, that is enough to see, figure out if things are working out well. And that's one of the things I've experienced at Hired in the past month, is everybody is so passionate about the company's mission. It sounds like a great group that's been hired here, and we're all rooting for the same cause. Will the results match? I don't know. Time will tell. But sounds like an awesome group of people to be working with.
I think there's a lot to this answer. I think there's a lot to the question too. Like, I'm curious about what it means for different organizations and different companies to say things are working or not working. And so I might even just start with that definition, which is, what is it working mean to you and your company? And for us, it means a lot of things. We are incredibly user focused. And so are we supporting our users? Are we helping people build businesses? If we're doing that, I would say a lot of our culture is working, because that is the thing we're trying to accomplish. Are people having really meaningful careers at Stripe? Are they experiencing what we call this step change in their career arcs? If we're creating that for people, there's stuff that's working. How do we measure these things? There's no one measurement. It's a lot of things. And so it's the things you see in your engagement survey. It's your offer acceptance rate. It's, again, what your customers are saying about you. Because if we recently just had an experience where we were interacting with some of our customers and had to share some news that wasn't perfect. And the response we got was really heartwarming, because what they said to us was, it's not about the thing that happened, it's about how you deal with it. And we really appreciate how you dealt with it. And those kind of experiences tell me something's working. Now, the other thing I'll say is, I feel like nothing is ever that black and white. And so I would say that I'd be surprised if I ever said everything's working perfectly. That's just not how it works, right? So there are lots of things that are going well, and there are things that we can improve, and I think that will always be the case, and that's sort of the mindset I always have, is it's not about striving for perfection, it's about figuring out what's the next thing we want to improve on, and how do we focus on the ones that are most impactful.
+1.
No, say something. I want to hear. How do you know if it's working, Anna?
Well, going back to what I said before, the purpose of your culture and your values is to enable you to achieve your mission. So how are you tracking against that in the long, the big arc, and in the short arc, your revenue goals or your customer goals or your product innovation? Those are two things. And then there are some very practical metrics that I think that I look at is, what is our regrettable attrition? What is, how are not only, is everyone thriving, but are people from underrepresented groups thriving at a similar rate as it relates to taking on expanded roles or the engagement survey? And again, everything is important, nothing is important. So I really tie how I'm assessing it to those priorities that are set by the voice of the employee.
Yeah, and I think one thing that each of you said that I found just particularly striking is taking time to define what success means for you and what working means for you, and getting alignment on that from the leadership team is so key to having any sort of cultural programs, and that is the starting point for all of us. All right, so that's our time. Thank you to all of our guests so much. It's such a pleasure. I know you're all very busy, and I appreciate taking the hour. And to all of our listeners, both for taking the time to tune in. And I apologize because I know there were some audiovisual challenges, but not to worry. This whole session was recorded, and we will be sending it out to everybody. So we will have a bug-free version for you to listen to on your own time if you couldn't catch any of it. So thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate it, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.